Hello, space friends. Captain Snuggles here, back in X4 Foundations with a quick follow-up to my low-attention combat test. Whenever I post one of these tests, I always get a lot of comments asking how the results would apply to some other scenario or some other set of parameters. This one was no different, and because we have so little information about low attention, and also because it's the holiday season and I'm feeling generous, I figured, sure, I'll run the test a couple more times and see what happens. I mainly focused on differences between ship size classes because that's what the comments mostly focused on. I used the best ships from each size class from my previous test, and I used everything I'd learned in that test to assemble a new set of optimized loadouts for them. The ships were the Morea, the Dragon Raider, the Odysseus E, and the Asgard. Subcapitals used plasma, capitals used tracking missiles. I sent them up against two new challenges, the VIG Syndicate Fighter Swarm and an overwhelming Holy Order Armada. With each challenge, I ran multiple repetitions, sometimes including small variations in loadouts or tactics, with a grand total of 21 runs in this test. With the Syndicate, I invaded Windfall 4 and wiped out every single defensive patrol, which added up to about 110 enemy fighters on average. I brought out my fleets at the 150 million credit price point first, but with that much investment, I just rolled over the Syndicate every time, so I scaled it back to 75 million credits and tried again. At that price point, my 85 Moreas cleared the system in about 10 minutes on average, with under 500,000 credits in average upkeep. The 30 Dragons averaged under 8 minutes with 0 losses, 0 hull damage, 0 upkeep of any sort. The 5 Odysseus E's finished in about 11 minutes, with 0 losses and a little over 1 million credits of missile expenditure. The Asgard was the only one that couldn't win at the 75 million credit price point. The Fighter Swarm stripped off all its modules and picked it apart. So, long story short, medium ships performed best, followed by fighters, then destroyers, then battleships. That's similar to my previous results, except the capital ship positions are swapped, which makes sense considering that the Asgard's main weapon had nothing to shoot. Overall, this was a very easy test. The Syndicate's fighter loadouts are not optimized for low attention combat. The Holy Order test was way tougher. I dropped my fleets into Holy Vision right near the point where 3 major enemy fleets were about to converge. I made my fleets fight 2 of those enemy fleets consecutively, which was a total of 2 auxiliaries, 14 destroyers, 28 frigates and corvettes, and 56 fighters. Sometimes elements of the first 2 fleets tried to retreat, and if they successfully did so, I made my forces engage the 3rd fleet until their total kill count was equivalent to eliminating 2 full fleets. This test scenario is dynamic, chaotic, and absolutely brutal, and therefore I just stuck with the 150 million credit fleet budget. At that price point, my 170 Moreas did pretty well for themselves, clearing both Holy Order fleets in a little more than 13 minutes, with a little more than 20 million credits worth of attrition, on average. That seemed pretty impressive, except then my 60 Dragon Raiders rolled up and slaughtered everything in the area in less than a third of the time, about 4 minutes, with lower attrition at about 18 million credits. On the one hand, this was the only time in all my tests that the dragons have taken meaningful losses, so it was nice to see that even gods can bleed. On the other hand, they didn't bleed much compared to my other fleets. My capital ships got stomped. In 5 out of the 6 runs, they struggled to fight just the first Holy Order fleet on its own, and they probably would have died a slow and painful death if the 2nd fleet hadn't shown up and put them out of their misery. In one run, the Asgards did manage to take down more than 1 fleet's worth of capital assets, and a decent handful of fighters, but it still added up to less than half of the total target tonnage. I tried several different permutations of loadouts and engagement strategies, but I never got any better results with any of my capital fleets. On average, the destroyers survived a little over 7 minutes and took about 20% of the enemy forces with them, and the battleships survived a little under 7 minutes and destroyed roughly 25% of the enemy. Add up all those results, and they follow roughly the same pattern as my previous test against the Xenon. Medium ships performed best by far, fighters came in second, battleships a distant third, and destroyers a very close fourth. So, now we have 3 low-attention combat tests to look at. There's my big, in-depth previous test, which featured a medium difficulty battle against the Xenon with their heavy capital ships and light escorts. Then there are the 2 smaller tests I did here, a fairly trivial fight against the VIG Syndicate fighter swarm, and the high difficulty battle against the combined arms doctrine of the Holy Order. So we've gotten a good spread of difficulty levels and target types. The results were pretty consistent throughout all 3 tests, with a couple of exceptions. First off, the Asgard only outperforms destroyers if it has enemy capital ships to shoot. Makes sense, not exactly groundbreaking, but still worth keeping in mind. And the second exception is that the performance gaps between ships seem to get wider as the difficulty of the challenge increases. In the low difficulty engagements against the Syndicate, the performance differences were easily measurable, but not blindingly obvious. In the medium difficulty fights against the Xenon, the differences were easily measurable and, generally, pretty apparent to the naked eye. And in the high difficulty fights against the Holy Order, differences were immense, obvious, and absurd. Again, the rankings stayed mostly the same, but the gaps between the rankings widened with difficulty. And I think that's the big reason why people sometimes think there's a discrepancy between their games and these test results. I get quite a few comments about ship effectiveness specifically in Hatikva's Choice, which is one of the systems that's been specifically designed to encourage combat while also giving the player a huge defender's advantage. It's carefully engineered to be a trivial combat scenario, and therefore it's very hard to detect differences in performance there. The differences will still be there, but they won't be observable during normal gameplay, and they won't be easily observable even with careful measurement, which is one reason why I run my tests against at least medium difficulty scenarios. Before I wrap up, I want to share a few more minor observations I made during all this testing. First, I expected Vigor to be a low difficulty challenge, but I didn't expect them to be that trivial. I never saw any big bursts of damage hitting my ships, so it seems like torpedoes basically don't work in low attention, which takes most of the Syndicate's DPS off the table. When I was fighting the Holy Order, their subcapitals were easily able to take down my capital ships without destroyer support. Even Xenon fighters seemed to deal more damage than the Syndicate on a per-ship basis. What I'm getting from all this is that Vigor is a really lopsided faction. Super scary in high attention and completely pathetic in low attention. Speaking of lopsided, I played around a little bit with having the map open versus closed during low attention combat, and it seems like having the map closed roughly doubles combat times and exaggerates the differences between ship classes without changing their respective rankings. So, it takes longer and the performance gaps get wider, but the overall trends stay the same. Take that with a grain of salt. It's pretty hard to make observations with the map closed, but to the best of my ability, that's what I was able to figure out. So, there you go. That's it for this quick test. I hope that's given you a little more insight into low attention performance, how it varies across ship classes and combat scenarios, and why I test things the way I do. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you'll tune in next time, and until then, this is Captain Snuggles, signing off.